In his new memoir, former President Barack Obama claims that many Americans were, quote, spooked by a black man in the White House, and that the Trump presidency was a direct result of that.
So Democratic strategist Jennifer Holdsworth and culture editor with The Federalist, Emily Jasinski, they join us now to weigh in on this and more. Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining.
Great to see you, ladies.
Good morning.
Happy Friday.
Absolutely. Jen, let's start with you. This President Obama, he's released his Volume 1. It's over 700 pages, so it's quite a tome. But this is something that caught a lot of people's eyes in the review. Essentially, President Obama, in his book, says essentially that Trump's rise was a direct result of racism. He basically doesn't want to take any responsibility for any of the policies and actions that he took while he was in office for 8 years. I mean, do you think that that's the right lesson that Democrats should learn from the 2016 election?
I think it's part of the lesson. The Trump presidency was death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? So there were a ton of things that led to it. And yes, some of it was racism, and we need to confront that. But we also need to confront how we recovered from the 2008 financial meltdown. And if we don't include that part of the story, then we're not telling the whole story.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Emily, I think that's really actually extraordinarily well said. And the quote specifically from Obama that people have pulled out, and he says, Donald Trump promised an elixir for the racial anxiety of millions of Americans spooked by a black man in the White House. And, not only does it ignore, part of the story, which was the financial collapse, the lack of any accountability for executives, the fact that homeowners were left out to dry, the soaring inequality that we've had over years and decades. But I also worry when we make it so direct, like people were too racist to vote for a black president, or, when Hillary Clinton lost it, people are too sexist to vote for a woman president. Then what happens when you have another minority candidate who wants to come and run, or a woman who wants to come and run? If voters have been told, no, the country's too racist and too sexist to elect these people, that will dramatically hurt their chances the next time that they step up.
Yeah, I agree completely. We see this as a phenomenon that I think repeats itself far too often in our politics, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have the hyperbole that is incentivized by the way the media is set up and nonprofits are set up, that it just totally incentivizes the messaging hyperbole of both political parties, and they create self-fulfilling prophecies, which is why you have people dressed in handmaids outfits outside the Supreme Court. And, I think it's a question of scale, right? So I absolutely believe that there are some people in this country who remain outright racist. That proportion of our population has shrunk dramatically in a very short period of time, and thank God for that. But it's a question of scale. And in this section, Obama is actually blaming millions of Americans. And who gave Barack Obama the presidency was people who voted for him. Yep. And then Donald Trump and some of those key swing Rust Belt states where Obama might think they're clinging to their guns, their God, and their religion, as he once said in Pennsylvania. But it's really, really important for Democrats not to smear a wide swath of the Trump voting population as racist. That's a lesson that they should have learned in 2016, and they have not learned by 2020. It is not the right thing to focus on.
Yeah, I've had this debate a million times, and the one I always point to, Jen, is, look, counties which had more jobs offshore to China from 2000 to 2016 overwhelmingly voted at almost nearly identical percentages for Bernie Sanders and for Donald Trump. These are the same Obama-Trump voters. It just couldn't be more clear to me across the industrial Midwest. And Jen, given how close the vote count was in those Midwestern states, what is the lesson that you and others, Democratic strategists, are taking away from this election so far?
I think it's all about messaging, and it's all about how campaigns are run. Now, I've disagreed with Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez on a number of messaging issues, but what we absolutely cannot disagree on is how campaigns are run in the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of them were run extremely poorly by entities such as the DCCC. And I think that they have a lot to answer for. And I don't necessarily think it was our message. We were overwhelmingly successful in 2016 by saying, hey, Democratic Party, run on the message that works for your district, but also acknowledge where we're headed as a party. That's something we didn't do in 2020. We ran away from it. And I think Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez hit that part on the head in the New York Times.
That's interesting.
Emily, it's a weird dynamic because Democrats won the presidency. Normally, the party that wins the presidency is pretty happy about that. But Democrats are, because of their failures to take the Senate, because of the failures in the House, they're sort of like, they feel sort of miserable about this. And I think they also look at, rightfully so, at the fact, look, we've had this pandemic. This guy was lying to us. He got caught lying to us. People have died. The economy, he didn't do much in terms of stimulus ultimately. But on the other side, you have Republicans who weirdly lost the presidency and feel sort of happy about it not having been as bad. So from the right perspective, what lessons do you think the Republican Party is learning? What are they ascribing Donald Trump's loss to ultimately? How are they thinking about all of this?
Well, there are still some that aren't accepting Donald Trump's loss, so that's one thing. But I would also say I actually wrote a piece about this week that I think Republicans are coming into 2024 and 2022 with an advantage, being that you see people really seriously grappling with the establishment's failures that were exposed, if nothing else, by Donald Trump. And you don't necessarily see that on the left to the same degree. Like people like Sagar actually himself is a great example, who are starting to rethink some of the establishment's conventional wisdom on economics and on cultural policies. And that's actually become, there are already organizations that have sprung up, like Orrin Cass's group, to start dealing with this on the right. You've seen changes in thinking about tech policy, even at think tanks. There's a really big effort on the right to grapple with and to start addressing the white working class and to start thinking about how to talk to Hispanic voters and Black voters. And that happened in 2012 after Mitt Romney lost and Reince Priebus, commissioned the famous autopsy, the infamous autopsy, I should say.
Yes.
But the conclusions were it was a regurgitation of stale Beltway conventional wisdom. And on the right, we're seeing none of that. That is all out the window now, especially after digesting the results from Tuesday. And instead, on the left, we are seeing more, I think, of an embrace of the Beltway conventional wisdom.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. Jen, I want to return to something you said about how campaigns are run. And I've been hearing a lot about that. Could you explain, actually, for the layman, what went wrong with bad campaigns?
Mm-hmm. Plain and simple, not enough digital spending. You can have the best argument in the world, right, that everybody would fully support given the opportunity. They're not giving the opportunity, especially in a pandemic when we kept focusing on, hey, we've got to get people out to vote early. We've got to get them to, do mail-in ballots. Why was that? Because you can't campaign in person, right? If you're acknowledging the pandemic, let me just put that out there, right? But the flip side of that is how you talk to the voters. We should have been investing hundreds of thousands, millions in each campaign, if we were able to, in digital spending. We did none of it. If you didn't believe that digital online organizing and digital advertisement worked after 2008, when President Obama revolutionized sort of the online space for campaigns, then you certainly should believe in it after 2020, when Donald Trump took it to the next level. There is no question that he also revolutionized the way you speak to people digitally. Now, he's well known, obviously, for having these ridiculous in-person rallies, but they follow that up digitally. And that is something that the Democrats are woefully behind right now.
That's interesting.
Jen, I also saw some hand-wringing ultimately about, hey, maybe Democrats should have been knocking doors and that it could have been done safely, social distance, wearing a mask, et cetera. What's your take on that?
Unfortunately, I just can't agree. I just think that there are too many people that are weary of the pandemic right now. And if, strangers had showed up to their door, it also would have made us hypocrites. Now, obviously, sometimes Democrats go out of their way to point out the hypocrisy of the Republicans. And that certainly would have been front and center for us had we done in-person campaign events. So I have to support the campaigns who didn't do that. I advised my campaigns not to do that either. It was not the time. But had we invested digitally, that wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, we're going to be back with Team Rising right after this. Stick with us, guys.